Welcome back, everyone. Again, the VLX 2020 with the theme Building Resilience with Lean Thinking in Practice. Thank you again to Dr. Greco and Kevin Nolan for the sessions that you've delivered today. And welcome to this third and final session for today, a panel discussion with Kevin Nolan, Jim Womack, and Jim Morgan. Once again, we have some functionality here that we're going to use with Zoom. This is our second of the 4 weeks, second of the 4 tracks that make up the VLX this year. Developing Lean Enterprise is our theme this week. In a couple of weeks, leading through crisis, where we'll again hear from GE Appliances. Kevin Nolan's colleague, Marcia Bray, will present. And then after a couple of week break in mid-November, we'll return with the theme Designing the Future, where we'll again hear from GE Appliances. In that instance, Dave Leone, but also from many other organizations that are practicing LPPD to design their future. As always, it's been great to see everyone on Slack, see the conversations taking place there, and we hope that folks are engaging with the Go Do Challenge as an opportunity, as a way to translate this experience into action, into practice at your organization. So the functionality that's relevant to our session here today is primarily the Q&A function. We are in a slightly different platform. We're in a Zoom webinar for this, whereas the last session we were in a Zoom meeting. So we have this nifty Q&A feature. That's what we will use primarily for the questions. Please, as the conversation unfolds, please be posting questions there as they come to you. I have prepared, so the way that this session is going to be structured is that I prepared a set of questions that will sort of guide us through the first half or so of this session. And then the second half is when we'll turn things over to the Q&A, to the questions that you guys have. So please flood that Q&A feature with those questions, and I will do my best as the moderator to pose those to our panel here today. Okay. I think that is it. So Kevin, thanks again for sharing with us about GEA's long and winding path to becoming a lean enterprise during the last hour. That was an awesome story. Jim and Jim, thank you for joining us again as part of the VLX. A couple of weeks ago, during our kickoff week, Jim and Jim, you two gave your reflections on the history, the current state of the lean movement. You described the challenges that we're facing today and for the foreseeable future. You offered some insights that will help us to tackle those challenges. And now today, Kevin's told us about what's going on at GE Appliances, a hire company, including some remarkable stories about how he and his colleagues have been using lean to deal with the chaos, as he described it, caused by the recent pandemic. So I'd like to start our panel discussion, if I could, by first giving Kevin a bit of a break. He's been on stage for the last hour or so. And start with Jim Womack and then Jim Morgan. What were some of the maybe 2 or 3 of your takeaways from the presentation that Kevin just delivered? I'll start with you, Jim Womack.
Given what I talked about in the first session of the VLX, I was delighted to hear somebody who's learned so much from crises. You may remember I talked about in that how we've done the greatest lean learning. And this is kind of at a fundamental level of concepts, practices, when we've had crises, not when times have been easy. And GE was brilliant at getting into crises. But then what made them unusual was that they mostly found a way forward that involved some changed thinking and some learning. And gosh, I wish everybody would do that, because that's pretty important. So I was delighted to get some validation there, Kevin, so thank you for making all those mistakes. Glad you're still around to talk about them. There were a couple of times when you nearly weren't, so that's all good. Let me say one other thing about this story. And by the way, that was a fantastic presentation. And I have been an innocent visitor in this whole thing, going out to Appliance Park, Louisville, walking around, taking a look. But I didn't do anything. You're not going to argue with me about that. And so therefore, I've got no skin in the game. And the story he was telling was the story I've seen. And it's pretty unusual to have management that can tell you a story that doesn't have at least a little bit of spinning to it. And that was completely consistent with what I've seen. So a terrific presentation. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for sticking with us. The stick-to-itness of that gang out in Louisville is a key part of the success, and we tend to underrate that. They've just stuck to it. Now, just say one other thing about this. This is not just a GE story. This is a great American story. And we've got some international viewers on this. It can be a great story about whatever country you're in. That GE was a classic modern management company. GE and General Motors really invented modern management. Managed by metrics, make your numbers top down, have staff solve problems, run the line, get all the stuff to the end, send it off to hospitals. When I first started going to Appliance Park, there were more product hospitals at the end of the line than they had over at GE Healthcare. It was amazing. All the appliances were in the hospital, and I could just see the cost. And yet that was the way they had run a modern management business. That yield on your high cost assets is the most important thing. As a manager, you must keep everything running. And by the way, we don't believe in indirect. That's terrible. So let's have as big a span as we can have between first line management and the people actually doing the work. So they would have 30 and 40 people with one frontline manager and call that efficiency. And that's the way modern management companies work. And then as times got tough, they started to do what modern management companies have also done, which is labor arbitrage. If we're not making it, doing it the way we do it, we don't know how to improve the way we do it. So let's find some people who work cheap. And the only thing different about GE Appliance was that they outsourced not only manufacturing to contractors in Asia and Mexico, but they also outsourced product development. So what an amazing thing that you just basically punt on first down. And so many companies did that. And part of our sort of national frustration right now is the residue of having done it. So then when they decided to bring it back, which was a bold decision, they realized they were going to have to behave in a different way. And that meant they were going to have to deeply think about how they did things. And they brought it back. And by the way, not for trade barriers, not for politicians yelling at them, not, you probably got some incentives there in Kentucky to bring some of this stuff back, but they mainly brought it back because it was the right thing to do if they just knew how to manage it. And then just final, and I'll be through, what an irony that the American people in Fairfield, of course they're now in Boston, these GE top shelf guys, the guys in Fairfield were busy sending stuff offshore, and the new Chinese management said, you got to be close to the customer. What an amazing thing. So this is all being driven by those evil Chinese who have said, you got to be close to the customer and you've got to get this right in Appliance Park, Louisville, Kentucky. So what an amazing story. I wish the whole country listened to your story, Kevin, and I wish the whole country would behave the way you guys have. And we'd be talking about a different situation in the USA.
And how about you, Jim Morgan? What were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, Jim's response was great. A lot of the same things struck me. First of all, Kevin, it was an outstanding presentation. I really enjoyed it. I particularly enjoyed your candor, which is something, you and I have always shared with each other is been really honest and direct, and including maybe that email list that I sent you. But the way you described your journey, I think it was your second slide in, and what the real world looks like, I think is just perfect. I always say that the path to success is not linear, and that's the way it works. And so I really appreciate that you represented it that way. And for me, it just sort of resonates with truth in terms of the ways that you guys have dealt with this. The other thing that really stands out, and Jim touched on this a bit, is the grit. I talked about that in my presentation last week. 2 weeks ago, whenever that was. And you really need a lot of resilience to take this journey. And you guys sort of kept it up through being, sold, going through a fire, going through a pandemic, the constancy of purpose, the fact that you guys kept working forward through all of this is really, really impressive. And, sort of demonstrates the level of resilience that you need to be successful at this. And I guess the final thing is, speaking of success, I'd just love to sit down with you and go over that list sometime and see where we've come from then.
Something to look forward to, Kevin. So what do you think about that, Kevin? That's a pretty nice assessment by both Jim and Jim on what's been accomplished there at GE and the presentation. Curious if you have anything to sort of say in response.
No, I think, I appreciate the observation. I appreciate, LEI has been great through this with us. And I think it's needed. And I think groups like this, being able to be involved and hear other people's story is so helpful. Because a lot of times, we're resilient, but I think in times you need encouragement. And whether it was encouragement from Jim and Jim, or through others, that we've been able to meet and we've been able to bring together that are along this same journey, because nobody has it easy. I don't think anyone's got this, simple formula where you do this and you can keep walking in, a straight linear path. When you fall down, it's nice to see sometimes that others have fallen too, and you can get back up and you can keep going forward. So I think that has been a big help for us, is having a network. And whether it's LEI or it's just other companies and others that are, involved in learning and, involved in, really understanding, how can we move forward? Because, we've made a lot of maybe stupid mistakes, and a lot of it is just from being naive. And I think, those kind of things, if you can sit and reflect and learn, but a lot of times you need others to bring context to it. So that's been very important for us, is to have others help us, see what we're seeing and help us move things forward.
So Kevin, you've mentioned LEI and Jim's involvement, support, coaching, encouragement over the years. GE Appliances has been one of LEI's co-learning partners for a number of years. We have organizations that we engage with, hopefully to be as helpful as we can be for those businesses as they tackle whatever business challenges that they have, but also kind of selfishly for the opportunity to learn from the Gemba, learn from participating in the experiments that the organizations are running. So in this case, there have been a number of folks as part of the kind of LEI team that have been involved, Jim Morgan being one of them. So a question for you, Jim Morgan, would be through that work over the years, I guess that photo was from 2013, I want to say, of supporting GE Appliances, helping out as you could. I'd love to hear sort of what you've learned through the engagement with GE Appliances, knowing that you're as passionate about LPPD as you are, and as curious of a learner, as Kevin called out as a virtue in his last presentation. So anyway, what are some things that you've learned through working with GE Appliances?
Yeah, beyond what I said earlier about resilience and grit and sticking to it, I've learned a ton actually from GE. And from the earliest days, the thing that really stood out about the GE team is their competence. I mean, these guys always knew their job. Technically, they were, they recruit some of the best engineers in the business, whether it's in product development or manufacturing engineering. They really know their business. They know their jobs. But despite that, or maybe because of that, they were always open to trying new ideas if it made sense to them. So our discussions have always been extremely candid. If they thought something didn't sound right to them, if they felt like, yeah, this is, whatever, they would push back really hard. But if they saw the value in something, they would fully embrace it, whether it was the early days working on craftsmanship or when we first started to do Obeas, when we started to think about people development in a different way. Kevin especially, but his whole team just fully embraced that. And so I was always impressed with, while they were really sharp, they were always open to learning more. And then over time, we started to add things like standard bill of process and taking a fixed and flexible approach to creating that. So we started to engage the ME folks, we started to engage manufacturing. And I think the thing that I've seen most recently that's been most impressive, and I think we've all learned from, is how much more powerful it is when it's a cross-functional effort, right? When you get design and PD, manufacturing, engineering, supply chain, everybody engaged in this effort. And I've been able to see this evolve over the years, and it's been really impressive. Not always easy, in fact, mostly not, but really impressive to see where it's evolved to today, and the way their programs are really integrated, where they're clearly designing value streams instead of just a product in isolation, and they're able to engage with people from up and down that value stream. I've learned a great deal from that, and some of the leaders that Kevin now has in PD.
So Kevin, you've, as you shared before, you've been at GE Appliances for many, many years, VP of Technology, Chief Technology Officer, now CEO. I'm curious if there's a few things that sort of stand out to you about GEA's development of capability around LPPD. What are some of the things that, I don't know, I guess you're most proud of today that you've learned in that realm? And then I have a follow-up question after you.
I think, Jim hit on a lot of the important parts. And I think, this concept of value stream and, how do we really work as a team? That was incredibly difficult, because I think the natural state of things is you're going to have engineering and manufacturing kind of button heads. And there's a natural tension that's there. And actually, I think it's somewhat healthy having that tension. But is that tension productive or is it destructive? And, a lot of times we think, well, we got to get our engineering, we got to get our drawing releases. Once our drawing releases are, then you're going to get manufacturing to go make the tools, et cetera. And we had to really change and modify that thinking. So we see now like drawings are a team sport. We actually don't have drawings anymore, right? You got model-based definitions. But it is a team sport where everyone's involved in developing that model and having it as a one source of truth. And I think, we had a lot of times you'll have the engineering bomb and then you have the M bomb, and these two kind of don't talk and don't intersect, and you throw things over the wall. So us really thinking value streams and thinking how the value add, our teams are fundamentally, they're organized. Before they would be organized around part development and the way engineering likes to think, because we would think, hey, we got to make the prototypes and we got to do the testing. Where now you have cross-functional teams organized around value streams. And it fundamentally changes the way parts are, because parts now, you're thinking about that kind of end use, even into, how are they going to be serviced? How are they going to have a life cycle approach? And that's a radical change and very difficult, because you have to change the way you grew up. The way I grew up was basically a throw it over the wall approach. And to think that, we don't know best as design engineer, and vice versa. So you have to have a team where everyone understands and respects the value of each other. And I think that's what's different is, every function valuing whether it's quality, sourcing, manufacturing, engineering, we play a critical role, and everyone's just like a team where you can't have one weak player out there on the field or you're not going to win the game. And that takes a lot to realize. And it takes time to realize, because everyone wants to be the superstar, right? And say, as long as I do my job perfect, well, then I'm going to get, great stats, and that's all that matters. But that, I don't feel that we have that culture anymore. I think Kevin Mazzella, who took over from my role, the relationship that he has now with the manufacturing, bill goods, and our sourcing and quality, you really see all those getting together as a team, and looking at how do we improve and how do we get better. But that takes practice and you have to have everyone support each other because it's so easy to slip back to the old roles. When something goes wrong, you always want to blame, well, you know, who screwed up? And you want to point over the wall somewhere. And it doesn't do you any good because in the end, we all have the same problem.
So maybe that sort of gets to my next question for you, Kevin, which is as you've transitioned in your roles over the last 10 years or so, as this activity around LPPD has been developing, I'm curious how your perspective on LPPD as it relates to sort of lean enterprise has shifted over the years as your roles have changed.
You know, I think, you know, in the role I have now, of course, you're seeing it, you know, more from the total business impact. But I'd say over time, being much more customer oriented, customer focused, and understanding, you know, in the end, the product that we're bringing the customer, is it satisfying the customer? Is it doing what it's intended to do? And so having that different view from an outside in view, we like to say now customer's boss. And that's who we all work for. Because if we're developing a new product, it doesn't matter what's on your financial metrics and your payback. You know, what matters is, are you delighting the customers? If that happens, everything else seems to work well. If you don't get that right, you got big problems, right? And so really keeping that eye on, you know, what's the customer value of what we're doing, I think is what's critical and what I keep trying to develop more. And that's the culture we're trying to really drive as a business. That's what in the end it's about, you know, and we start really seeing the value. I think COVID's been a great thing because if we ever saw the value of manufacturing, it's now. You know, we've got a lot of back orders. I think everyone's seeing in the news that the whole industry is short on appliances. And you see where the work is done and the type of work and what it means to get product out the door, and get good product out the door, good high quality product. So, you know, just keeping that outside perspective, I think it's easier in the seat that I'm in right now. But that's ultimately, I think, what's good for the organization.
Maybe to build on that a little bit, Jim Womack, a question for you. The business system at Toyota that you and your co-authors of Machine That Changed the World described included their innovative approach to product development. In your view, why is product and process development so integral to a lean business system or a lean enterprise?
Well, thanks. 30 years ago, we wrote a book. And the book had 5 chapters that you really needed to read. It had some other chapters, but the 5 chapters you needed to read were chapters on production, you know, fulfillment from start to finish, order to cash, on how you manage and align your suppliers, on how you support your customers, on a general management system, and on product and process development. And that's key. We don't call it LPPD with 2 P's for no reason. It's not just the product, it's the process for realizing the product that you have to think about. And those are equal. You can't have a lean enterprise unless you have lean in every one, but also unless they are woven together. And that's been the hard part. As I reflect back on 30 years, it was amazing, that machine book. People would come up to me and say they had read the book and it was a great book about factories. And that would happen over and over and over again. And I'd say, well, gee whiz, there are 5 chapters that you should have read, forget the rest. And those were of equal length. And what it tells you is that they have to be woven together. Why didn't you get that? And the answer is, for whatever reason, they didn't. So there was a real lag in getting beyond the factory. And when I say the factory, that's in healthcare, what you're doing in the ward. That's in sales, what you're doing in fulfilling orders and processing documents and so forth. There was a big lag to get beyond production into the other elements. And product and process development, thank goodness, with Jim Morgan's good work, is now much more prominent in the thinking of people in the lean community. And yet, by the way, we still have not really got the supplier management thing or the customer support thing down the way I think it should be. But okay, there we are. So as you were saying before, Kevin, if you've got a problem, everybody's got a problem on the team, whether they want to think that or not. And if you have a malperforming piece of the puzzle, in this case, product and process development, you can have a wonderful factory. You can have a wonderful sales organization, although it really ought to be good on warranty claims. And you're going to have less than what you could have had if you had all of the pieces aligned and learning together and taking them up to the same level. So therefore, gosh, I hope we're now in a new chapter that in the last 10 years, and again, this is largely Jim Morgan's good work of trying to explain what a lean product and process development system looks like, to have some real examples of how people did transformations in what, if I may say, were pretty bad companies. I'm talking about the old Ford Motor Company, the old pre-Jim Morgan Ford Motor Company. So that we've now got the examples. And by the way, you guys, Kevin, are going to be a great example. And in fact, get ready for tourism, and just say no to most tourism. You've got an end-to-end story to tell. And not very many people have got an end-to-end story to tell about how you tried to level up all of the parts of the enterprise so that they're mutually reinforcing and you don't have any weak players on the field. So I think this is great. I think somebody ought to write about this. But don't get overwhelmed, stampeded with industrial tourists. Industrial tourism is actually not worth very much. Unless you're willing to go and actually risk failure yourself, and it turns out a lot of people aren't. So there.
I think Jim Womack may be one of those tourists. He described himself earlier as an innocent visitor, which some folks who have been visited by Jim Morgan may take issue with that particular characterization.
I think I'm very nice.
Innocent visitor. So Jim Morgan, a couple weeks ago, you put forward 6 guiding principles for LPPD. As we've clearly established, you've known Kevin and GE Appliances for many years now. Maybe you can share with us a couple of concrete examples of practices that exist at GE Appliances these days that embody some of those principles.
Sure. So first of all, Jim, check is in the mail. I appreciate all the praise. But there's a lot of people who've done some fabulous work in this space. So I think GE is quickly becoming one of the shining examples of the 6 principles, right? The practices that come out of thinking in terms of first principles and how to apply those. Kevin already mentioned Kevin Mazzella, the guy that took his old job, is just fabulous leader, has done a lot to lead this. There's a whole bunch of folks at GE who have embraced this and quite frankly that I learn from every time I go down there. One of those people is a lady named Allison Seward, who's leading a critical program for GE right now. And I think that's probably where a lot of these examples reside. So for example, one of the things that her team has done with regard to designing the value stream is organizing in these fishbone teams. Kevin talked a little bit about them, getting people from each point in the value stream together, organizing them around specific subsystems. Instead of organizing functional, you get cross-functional folks that are organized around subsystems in the product that they're creating. And they work together, considering every step in delivering value right from the beginning of the program. And I think that's a great example. They also, very early on, set up a pilot line so they can start to think about manufacturing. And they do these exercises that they refer to as tri-storming. Where they just try ideas and they evolve the product and the process, as Jim said, both P's, simultaneously. And Allison and her team have come up with some great ideas by doing this. It's a team sport. They've really focused on their OBEA. They've sort of reorganized it several times now to get it where it works best for them. Excuse me. In order to make not only the process and the schedule visible, but key decisions visible. Decisions are often a big holdup in product development programs and can be invisible to the team, right? So the decision that you make in one value stream or one workflow has a big impact on another workflow. and delays in those decisions and not understanding who should make those decisions can have a big negative impact on the program. And so Alice and her team have made those key decisions very visible. They've worked on synchronizing that work by actually creating a decision flow diagram that everybody's looking at so that they understand the interdependencies between the various workflows, so that they know what the critical decision path is going forward. And then again, building and learning, that pilot line is a great example of how the team learns together. So I think, it's really, I think I mentioned this last week, it's very difficult to map, one principle to one practice kind of thing. And that's really not the point. But you can see evidence of all of those principles in the work that team is doing. It's just one team that I'm familiar with. There's lots of other great stuff going on at GE.
Excellent.
So just if I, Josh, I could jump on, some of the great stuff I see is when we talk about those value streams, also involved now is team leaders, we got production associates. So I think the other thing is understanding the people that are there with the product day in and day out. And a lot of times I think there was just engineering arrogance, right? We think we know how to design everything, where some of the best ideas are out of those team leaders, right? Because they know the problems they've had, they know the struggles. And I think the way Allison and team have been able to brace all the ideas, all right? And that's, I think the beauty is everyone's ideas need to count. It doesn't matter what your degree is, your diploma, it matters what your knowledge is and how you can apply it. And that's one of the things I really see an evolution going on with these teams.
So I think you just called out a couple of those principles, right? It's a team sport, people first, people from all across the value stream. Kevin, I guess just a question for you about the 6 principles that Jim Morgan has shared with us. And what kind of resonated with you and your experience with those principles? What do you see as their value?
I'd say the toughest ones are probably the most valuable ones. Jim talks about synchronous workflow. It is detailed. And I remember when he first started talking, my head spins. I'm still not good at it. But luckily we've got some smarter folks than me that can really think, because it's kind of like, playing an instrument or running an orchestra and all the things that need to be happening and how you write music for multiple things at one time. It's a complicated matter, and understanding how to synchronize those workflows. There's skill involved in practice. And I think it sounds easy. That's difficult. It took us a long time. I think Kevin Mazzell and team are doing better than I was doing on it, Jim. But I think that's one where there's huge value when you can get it right, but it's hard to do. The other thing I think is reuse and knowledge reuse. Jim talked to us a lot initially about, once Ford figured out the right way to make a door, that's how you make a door, or how you make a hood, right? And what's, impact and what's involved in collision. Certain things you can change and other things you don't want to, fixed and flexible. That is hard to think of, because as engineers, we pride ourselves in always coming up with there's a better way to do things. So we don't fundamentally, if things were too standard, we're out of work, right? Because we need to be doing something new all the time. And I think so thinking through, here's the right way to do certain things, and documenting that and putting those workflow. So Jim talks about, standard work in engineering. And I think engineering, we like to think, oh, this is knowledge work. It can't be standard work. But everything can be standardized, and how you can think through what you do and what you design. That takes a lot of thought and time. So I'd say those are the 2 big ones that, I think we're still scratching the surface of what we can do with them.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think one of the most challenging parts, at least for me and some of the other companies that I've worked with, is that balance between fixed and flexible, right? What can and should be standardized versus where we can allow maximum degrees of freedom for innovation and creativity, right? And thinking about how you deliver best value to your customer is a good way to guide your decision making, because you don't want it to be completely standardized so that there's no innovation, there's no, that's not the point of product development. But understanding the difference there is really key.
So Jim Womack, maybe one final prepared question that I have, and then we will transition over to the Q&A. There's lots of good questions coming in. So I guess a plug for that. We're going to transition here in just a moment to the questions that you all have. But Jim Womack, maybe one final question for you first. So during your presentation a couple of weeks ago, you described 6 challenges that you see that we're all facing, challenges associated with changes in work and management and our origins and many other things, software. So I'm curious, what sort of stands out to you from the story there at GE Appliances in terms of what they're doing to address some of those challenges? They're not immune. They can't avoid those challenges. We're all in it together.
Well, I think the big story to this point is that beginning, ballpark 2010, General Electric Appliances was able to make very substantial progress in creating an end-to-end lean enterprise. That's an enormous thing. That's a tremendous amount of heavy lifting. It's stick to it. It takes time. And so they were just getting that done. Didn't say it was perfect, but say, hey, it's getting to be pretty good when COVID arrived. And the 6 challenges that I mentioned that we're all going to have to deal with are post-COVID challenges. They're not right now, soon. But I think the challenge that's before those challenges was just how to get through the COVID trauma. And on that, they had this long history of learning from disaster. So here's the latest disaster, and pretty interesting to listen about what they've learned. By the way, one of the things you have to have in these kind of unpredictable black swan events is that you have to have some emergency reserve. And that can be finished goods. That could be, plants and machinery that are just kept mothballed. But here, they're doing the same thing people did in the hospitals. To get capacity in the hospitals, they cut out elective surgery. Across the country, just cut out all elective surgery and created COVID wards out of what had been elective wards. And at GE, they had all these people in the office. And I don't want to speak for you, Kevin, but I think one could say it as a catastrophe, pandemic sweeps over you. You say, gee, funny thing, we've got more demand, but we don't have enough people. Where are our reserves to deal with the crisis? And then you went down the hall and said, wait a minute, what are those lawyers doing over there, if anything? And what are those accountants doing? And what are those HR people doing? Hey, folks, let's go create some value. So I think it's a really fascinating story of how they took these people out and said, this is going to be good for everybody in every way, that you're going to learn fine-grained knowledge of what it means to create value and how the rest of the organization needs to support you. And by the way, you're going to make some great products so we don't disappoint our customer. So that's the challenge they've been working on right now. Again, I think it's a great story to write up there. We're not through yet. We don't quite know how this thing is going to work out. But I think that's the challenge of the moment, a challenge they have really risen to. By the way, across the economy, it's amazing that some people like airlines have got no work to do. And other people like paper towel factories and GE Appliances have got more work than they can do. Same pandemic, different consequences. What are you going to do to respond? What reserves have you got? And what are you going to learn? What are you going to learn? And Kevin, I just would be fascinated 6 months or a year from now to have a chat about what not you, yes you, but all of your people together learned and how they were able to be better for other reasons going forward from this challenge. Not just that you're better at dealing with future pandemics, but things that you've learned that are actually going to benefit your business and your customer going a long ways forward. Not there yet. Don't stop to tell that story right now. Keep those lawyers building machines, okay? Just for right now. But that is, I think, the big thing that's going on here.
So maybe that, with that development in mind for the next question could be relevant here. So someone asks a question for you, Kevin. When it comes to transformational change, how have you seen GE Appliances culture change and grow outside of what's happening on the manufacturing floor? Have you had to bring in new talent? Have you seen your people embrace change organically? That's the question.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, you know, you look at post-sale, we were a pretty steady business with GE, but post-sale, this business is really accelerated. You look at on all the metrics, I think we're performing, you know, better now than we ever had. And it's a testament to the people. And one of the things when I took over, we didn't really change many. We brought in some new talent, you know, in certain areas, like we didn't really have brand departments. So certain areas we had like a lack of capability. But for the most part, we've got the same people here, and the performance of the business, I think, is radically different than before. And it kind of brings me back, you know, the Numi story has been just a total encouragement to me of, you know, what's the issue? Is it people, or is it the environment that these people are working for? And I always had a kind of a dream, why can't we be, you know, like Numi? Is it the people? It's really like we've got a business, you know, that's full of non-strategic thinkers and, you know, kind of a Passover business? Or is it maybe the way we're running this business and the way we're thinking about this business? And so that, I think, is the true story here is your people are always your biggest asset. How do you make sure you have an environment for those folks where they can succeed and they can prosper and they can bring their best self to work every day? And that's, I think, what I see changing. And I think lean has been a big part of that, because it's just fundamentally, we value your ideas. We value, you know, what kind of input, what you have to say. And it gives me a lot of encouragement. And I think, you know, a lot of times you like to think, oh, my manager's a jerk. Doesn't know. That's, you know, it's true sometimes. I know some might say that. But a lot of times it's you got to look past the people of why are the people behaving the way they're behaving? And, you know, what do we need to do to kind of unleash a more potential that probably everybody's got.
No surprise, we have most of the questions that are coming in are for you, Kevin. So we're going to stick with you here. Taruna asks, can you talk about if and how lean has brought transformation to business processes? Are there any specific business process value streams that you focused on?
You know, as we look at Hoshin, kind of everything gets brought into play right there. And one of the things I think the way we're running the business is now through what we call micro enterprises. And it's a philosophy that came down from high air, but I think is very rooted in lean thinking. And what we like to do is we like to have work broken down to where value is created. So instead of running like a top-down business management, you know, where kind of the CEO knows everything, and with me, I definitely don't, is we've tried to break the work down to where, you know, it can impact the customer and make decisions where decisions can be made at the, you know, the most real time and the most informed. So I think the process we're running now is very much like that, very decentralized. And that's also, I think, helped us a lot during these times, because we've had certain product lines, there's just been a ton of demand. Other product lines where we saw some things dry up for a while, like we build hotel motel air conditioners, and the demand for that really went to zero for a while, as nobody was, you know, operating hotels. And so being able to be nimble and not having this kind of set playbook, and a playbook that can adjust and that can move and that can react, is a lot of what we're trying to do now from an organization, and make decisions where decisions need to be made. Just like you want the assembly, you know, out on the plant floor, you want the operators to solve problems where problems occur. That's true in business. And you want the people that are closest to the action. So we always like to say, like, the sales force is one of your best, you know, they're kind of like your operators. They have a pulse on what's going on day in and day out. And then how tuned in are you to their voice? And I think the farther you get a CEO from a salesperson, the less likely is you're going to make the right decisions. And how can you break those decisions down closest to where the action is?
So you also talked about, in your presentation, you talked about the value of having a coach. You called out a couple of them. Here's a question from Eric Gordon. Folks like Art Byrne comment that they did whatever the Shingijutsu consultants told them to do, no matter how silly it sounded. Kevin, do you have any things that you were asked to do, told to do in the lean journey that seemed wrong, but turned out great after time? What recommendation was most helpful that at first seemed ridiculous? Maybe it was some of those things in Jim Morgan's email. I don't know.
A lot of what Jim said is crazy to me. It still is, but we're working on it, Jim. I think like Shingazitsu, we work with Shingazitsu and they have an interesting, method, right? They're very Socratic in their teaching, where you have to do your own learning. They might ask questions, etc. So I think a lot of this is, people might say things, to push an envelope. They might try to push you out of their comfort zone in your questions. And we've had some of that. We've made some mistakes on equipment where, we tried to invent equipment, invent processes that, didn't stand up to the, you can make 10 pieces, not a million pieces. So I think all of this stuff is you got to be able to willing to try, but then you also got to be willing to be practical. What is actually going to work and what are you ready for? Like Jim talked to, we have a lot of hospitals, right? In here at Appliance Park, so it's impossible to go from a hospital to no hospital. So the other thing is, so we're so used to running with queues and then the teaching is you should have 0 queues. Well, it's like anything. You could be a tightrope walker that's been used to having a net and someone says a really good one doesn't have a net. Well, you shouldn't just take it away before you know you're not going to fall or you're going to die. And we made a couple of those blunders where, theoretically, why should you have a net? Just don't fall. And so people might teach you that, but be careful. Are you ready for that yet?
So looking at the questions here, there continues to be lots of interest in the content of the email that Jim Morgan sent you, Kevin, after his visit. So when you guys sit down and review that together, review the update Jim Morgan's report card, maybe you could think about what's a version of that that could be made available for public consumption. Anyway, another question for you, Kevin.
You could torture many people with all these suggestions.
That's right. So a question about, does GE Appliances have an equivalent of the chief engineer? How does product development leadership work at Appliance Park?
Yeah, so that's been a hotly debated topic time in, time out of, the chief engineer. One of the way that we're organized here is what we have is running the business. We have product management, and product management in many ways is deciding what is the, next product, where do we want to, go next? And then we can pass it off onto a NPI team, we call them. And that pass off many times causes a lot of trouble because the person thinking of the idea can very much define it and then pass it down to an execution team. And then you can be working on the wrong thing. And so I think we've hit kind of a hybrid where we don't have a true chief engineer like we've learned, what Toyota had, where the buck really stops and they are the business leader because of the way we have what we call micro enterprises now, but the product lines. So if you talk to someone like Allison, she's hugely influential now, much more than before on developing what that spec is. So I'd say product management now is giving more of a space where we need to design and innovate in. And then a person like Allison is much more responsible of how do we define that space so she has more control and, can act more like the chief engineer as we're working this cross-functional, because everything's a trade-off in life. And that's what product development is, really a balance and a management of trade-offs. And if the person running that program doesn't have the ability to make them, you can get yourself into big trouble. And I think we've evolved so that a person like Allison, I think, has many more levers that can be made, and we get much better product because of it. So we're still evolving. I think it's difficult because it's hard you look at what Toyota does, but if somewhat, I think it's because of platforms, it's cars, it's the way those companies are organized that our scale and scope doesn't lend itself to that. So you have to make kind of hybrids and translations that still keep some of the, the best parts and the ideas behind it.
When you talked earlier about there being a good type of friction between engineering and manufacturing, can you share with us a bit more of the sort of the context around that and maybe some examples?
Yeah, I think everybody comes at things from a different viewpoint. I think, Jim, you could probably weigh in on this better than I could ever. You know, another thing is design. You get design wants to have all fancy curves and shapes, and then they throw it to engineer. We want everything flat and straight. And then manufacturing wants everything the same. So fundamentally, we all like different, you know, aspects. And now how do you pull those together and how do you make the right trade-off? So maybe, Jim, you can talk to some of those.
Yeah, so one of my mentors many, many years ago said that it takes a lot of conflict to make a great car. And that's a truth that I've held throughout my career. And what that means is it takes a lot of people who are very passionate about what they do, that really want to do the best thing for the customer from their perspective, whether it's serviceability, manufacturing, the design folks, engineering. They're all very passionate about how to deliver value to the customer. If you don't have that, I worry about the product, right? I think you're going to end up with a pretty mediocre product without that. It's managing that conflict. It's managing that friction in a positive way that makes the difference between a great team experience and a great product and just a bunch of chaos and political infighting. And that is oftentimes it's certainly the role of leadership, but oftentimes within a program, that's the role of the chief engineer, making those trade-offs, understanding each of those perspectives. And, you know, Al Ward used to talk about the entrepreneurial system designer. And that's really, you know, understanding the system and how all those inputs can make it a better overall system. That's managing that conflict. But without it, I would almost assure you're going to have a crappy product. Agricultural product. No, I'm just kidding.
More of that. So something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, what seemed to be on a lot of people's mind during the first track of the VLX was the ways that folks are dealing with the pandemic, the challenge with going to Gemba, so to speak. A question here from Howard. Kevin, during COVID, have you guys experimented with new ways to get to the Gemba, both in the factory and in the transactional areas, office work?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been very strict on, you know, the basics of from day one, temperature, masks, et cetera. But like, I'll go to Allison's team. You know, Allison is very strict on the rules of her team because our general work procedures are, you know, you have to wear a mask. You got to have all the right PPE. But anytime any of us, if I want to go near anybody on Allison's team, Allison makes sure you're wearing face shields. So she goes to what we call level 2 PPE. And she's very strict on that. So if you're going to be anywhere near her team, you're going to go level 2 PPE because her view is we've got to be in the Gemba, but we've got to be safe. So it's a testament to how valuable she sees that going to where the work's done and doing everything to protect that. Because if someone does get sick and we've got issues, it could end all that. So it's just taking the real precautions on. And then the other thing we've done is we've looked at, and some people have gotten upset because we call essential work. I think it's a bad term. But we also try to keep people out of the office that aren't truly doing the value add that needs to be in the office. So if someone's on the team that doesn't need to be there, we don't want them there. And we'll have, you know, if there needs to be certain things that are physical reviews, people come in for that. Otherwise, they're home. So we've tried to really limit the exposure. And a lot of it, we want to limit the exposure out on our factory. So if you're in the factory doing value add work, you know, you got to be doing that work. And that's why you're here. Otherwise, if you can do the work anywhere else, that's what we do.
So something I'll plug for those that might be interested in learning more on lean.org, you can find a webinar that we did a couple months ago, I guess, with Rich Calvaruso from GE Appliances, one of Kevin's colleagues, and Chris Shear and some other folks from Herman Miller, a company that Kevin mentioned during his presentation, on just some specific problem-solving examples of what they've been doing since the onset of the pandemic to set up things like temperature monitoring and workstations with plexiglass dividers and various things. Anyway, it was super interesting to hear both the examples of how sort of the solutions themselves, but I think more importantly, how those organizations with the lean capability that they have were applying it to solve the myriad and novel problems that have come with the pandemic. So a plug to go check that out. With just a few minutes left, Jim Womack, I'm curious if if you have any observations or comments to share on what we've heard from Kevin, primarily in the last half an hour.
Well, let me change that slightly. That LEI's mission is to help people share learning, and I think this is an unusual treasure trove of learning. And so this today is really a small piece, and yet this is a big time burden. Kevin's gone to a lot of trouble to take time for us when he's got more to do than he probably can quite get done anyway. So what I am interested in is mechanisms for people learning where we can't do industrial tourism anytime soon, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But how can we, at low cost, without being burdensome, can people share what they've learned? And how can everybody be involved in that? It's not fair not to share what you've learned, including the mistakes you made, and expect everybody else to just help you rather than you help them. So I think it's a challenge for all of us right now of how we take a story like the GEA story and say, gosh, how could we cost effectively, time effectively, in a timely way, share what's been learned. And then, by the way, finally, you were saying, Kevin, that with regard to some of the features of how you do this kind of chief engineer end-to-end stuff, you're still evolving. Anybody who doesn't hear something that somebody else has done and then take it home and say, okay, now let's adjust this to who we are, is probably going to not get very far. So that there are two ends to the thing. One, the people who've done something need to share what they've learned. And then the people who hear about it need to take it home and evolve it. And then, by the way, when they've evolved it, they need to share it again. So that's a large part of the mission of LEI. I wish I could say we've really done that very well during the pandemic. We've been struggling like everybody else, like to make a living. But still, as we go forward, there's a lot of learning here. And I think there must be some cost-effective ways to share it, and then to share what happens when people try to use it and evolve it.
Yeah, wonderful. Nice way to close. Yeah, thank you again, Kevin. This has been a ton of your time in preparation, and then today delivery. You're being even further generous with your time by joining us on a panel discussion later in the week with some of the other speakers. So thank you for that, for sure. Great sharing and opportunity for all of us to learn through your experience. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today and for this session. Thank you for the questions. They were really, really great. Led to a good discussion. Of course, not all of the questions were able to be put to our speakers today, but we are noting those questions down. And I think as Pat Panchek previewed a couple of hours ago, that will be fodder for future content and stories that LEI can help to share and distribute across the lean community. Matt, if you could pull up the closing slides here. So just a few things to go through before I let you all go. So we are here as part of a broader experience, what we're calling the virtual lean learning experience. And so all of you who are here made it here. You made it into this virtual room through the platform Zoom. But the other platform for this experience is what we're calling the VLX Learning Portal, where the questions to sort of what are we offering, where are things happening, so on and so forth are answered. And so just a quick overview of all that can be found at the Learning Portal. There you'll see the schedule. There were some articles, some background material that we shared for you to review before today's session or before the sessions throughout this week. There are links to the Slack community where discussions are taking place. As a plug, all of these sessions are being recorded, and by tomorrow morning, the recordings of these sessions will be available. All those things are also housed at the learning portal. And then, as I mentioned before, there are activities to try to put some of these ideas into practice. We call those the Go Do Challenge. It's also where you can just see sort of your own progress on consuming all that the VLX is offering. Just wanted to mention that again. Here's how to get onto it. You need to log in. Once you do that, go to My Dashboard. There's been some confusion about this. Go to My Dashboard. That's where access to all of the content, all of the links and things that I just mentioned can be found. Once you go to My Dashboard, here's what you would see. One more click there, Matt. There you go. Perfect. So as you can see here on the left-hand side is everything that is there. Again, you can track your progress through the course. You can see a schedule overviewing the entire week. Everything you need to know is in one location. Speaking of things that you need to know, tomorrow we have 2 more live sessions at noon Eastern. We have Robert Martichenko joining us to talk about supply chain, a hot topic these days, especially with outages of things like paper towels that the Wall Street Journal has recently reported on. And then after Robert's session, we'll be joined by Dr. Fred, who's going to talk to us about his effort to use, his and his team's effort to use lean thinking in search of the perfect cancer care down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So very much looking forward to those sessions tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you all again. Again, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Thank everyone who has joined us today. We will see you online and virtually through the rest of the VLX. Bye-bye for now.